Thank you. Faye, in addition to her role as dean, has a cross-appointment at the Department of Psychiatry at U of T. She also holds the Margaret and Wallace McCain Family Chair in Child and Family. She has conducted research on bullying, cyberbullying, and cyber counseling, and is author of a book entitled Bullying, a relationship-based guide to assessment, prevention, and intervention, and it was published in 2012 by Oxford University Press. Marian teaches and writes on direct clinical practice and the theory and practice of social work education. Her most recent book is entitled Achieving Competence in Social Work Practice Through Field Education, and that book was published by the University of Toronto Press in 2010. The format is that they will be speaking till sometime a little after 2, and if you can stay, we're hoping that there'll be time for 15-20 minutes for the Q&A. We've run a little bit over our time, but we hope that you're going to stay because it's going to be a wonderful presentation, and it's on a very important topic. And if you're interested in the PowerPoint, Faye, and you could just contact Faye and Marian, and they'll give you the address and they will send it to you. Thank you so much.
Can people hear me? Okay, great. So while we're getting that going, we'll start talking. So thank you it's a great honor for us to be invited to speak here. And as everybody has said, but I just need to stress again that the Ontario Association of Social Workers is just such a wonderful organization. I feel in my years as in children's mental health, I felt like I always could count on them. Being at the faculty, they're absolutely wonderful, and I feel we're very lucky, and they're one of the organizations and all the members that make me feel very proud of social work. So I just want to say that. In terms of this project, I think people know one of our premise at our faculty, the Hermitage Faculty of Social Work, is research integrated with practice and practice integrated with research. And this is a perfect example because Marian and I have both continued small private practice as faculty. I guess for two reasons. I think I can speak for both of us to say partly out of love of it because I've done it for so many years and so has Marian. And the other part is I feel like the second I stop doing it becomes a memory. So how could I teach it and research it? So this is an example where the research came directly out of the practice, not only out of the practice, but out of major disruptions in the practice, where a few years ago, for me, I had a very major disruption because a client asked me to have a little bit of contact with cyber technology. Nobody was doing it at the time. I didn't think. I thought, yeah, it won't hurt. And it just really raised many issues. And then I started speaking to Marian, and she had a similar reaction. And what we kept saying was, we both have been doing this for many, many years. We've really never had boundary problems, and all of a sudden we're having these problems. So if we're having it, other people are having it. So we thought, let's take that as an opportunity to start asking. So we started asking people unofficially, and then we decided to do it officially. So it's been a lot of fun and very interesting. So I'm just going to, how does it work? Okay. Okay, so we're calling it It Has Crept In, because when we first started doing it, it was creeping in. But now it's in. So I think that's important. So the purpose of the talk basically is to discuss how social work practitioners respond to and navigate the changing digital landscape in their traditional face-to-face practice. That's the thing. We're not talking about cyber counseling because we know there's e-therapy and cyber counseling, which is a whole field and it's very important, but it comes with very clear protocol, procedures, encryption, but traditional counseling is different. You're doing face-to-face and next thing you know it comes in. So we want to examine basically how information and communication technologies have crept in. We want to examine the associated ethical and clinical turning points and issues because, of course, they come up. And then we want to review the implications for practice. So fundamentally, though, before we start, how people relate to one another has drastically changed. Boundaries of relationships have changed with technology. And I would say when we started even doing this, when I first started doing work on cyberbullying, I was still saying that, but now it's changed at another exponential level. Once these handheld devices have become available for all of us, the world has exploded. It's completely different. And I think one of the things that we've realized in talking about it, when we talk about social work practice, that we realize we can't talk about it when we talk about boundaries and confidentiality and privacy. We can't really talk about it without looking at the context of the new world, because every aspect of the world has changed in terms of boundaries, privacy, all of that. So we can't just think that social work has not. That's the world we live in, so we need to address that. So it's growing exponentially, even from the time we began 3 years ago. And it's really, cyber technology has permeated how individuals seek support for a wide range of issues. And that's all the way from formal e-counseling to checking the web for everything, to contacting their counselor or worker, by email, of course checking Google. And it presents unique complexities for practitioners. And it's important because we want to really stress too that we're not taking a pro or a con, because there's tremendous benefits and there's tremendous challenges. And I think the main point though is it's here to stay, so we need to just understand those. And it's interesting, it's an increasing requirement for social work practice. Just about 2 weeks ago we were having a meeting, and one of our students who's just graduated, who's looking for jobs, sent me 2 ads, and in both ads, and these were not Warren Chappelle, so it was not it wasn't agencies that do that, and part of the criteria was experience with cyber counseling. So that's there. So it's really, that's why we decided it really has crept in. And we don't know how aware people are of these things. So basically, youth and adults. I mean, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I would have said just youth. Now it's everybody relies on technology for social connections, entertainment, information, personal help and advice, everything, you name it. And especially now with the handheld devices, because you can check up everything. And the other important thing is it allows clients to access and communicate with practitioners with a newfound ease, and that's regardless of whether the practitioner gives up the information. And that's a fundamental difference, let's say, from when I first started practice. I mean, they could contact, I can think of all the years when I was in children's mental health, there was one client who ever found my personal information and my address, who did that without me giving that out. It was just the boundary. You saw people, you could, if you chose to give the number, you gave it out. But now, so they can access us, and importantly, it's public information. That's the thing too. It's not private information, it's public. So we don't have the right or the ability to really say, well, you can't do that, I'm offended, it's private, because it's public information. So how we address it is up to us, but we can't just say it doesn't happen. And gone are the days where somebody can just say, the way I deal with it is I just don't give out my email address, because you might not give out your email address, but they can find it. They can try to befriend you on Facebook. And then people will say, well, I'm just not going to be a friend. But if you ignore them, that's now part of your relationship. So you still have to address that. So basically, the sheer amount of information just highlights the dramatic shift. And like I said, it's public. And I like these quotes. This is from somebody who's written on it. They cannot block certain aspects of their lives from their patients, and they must learn to adapt to the new world. It doesn't mean you have to embrace it in a particular way, but it means everybody has a choice. And then therapists who feel invaded need to address their reactions. And this is one perspective, there's many other perspectives, but I think that's the point. We have to address our reactions. And I think just generally I've already said that. So it offers many benefits and it raises challenges. And there's a lack of research, there really is. There's more research, there's quite a lot of research on cyber e-therapy, but there's not much research at all on what it's like when it's creeping in. So we don't have much guidance for how to go ahead with it. So some of the benefits, we have to talk about the benefits. There's increased accessibility. So for people who might not be able to access something because of not having the money, not having childcare, having severe anxiety, being in a remote space, rural, that it provides access. So that's critical. It's an easier and faster way to communicate with clients. Again, for good and for bad, but it's a benefit. And it can provide clients with a greater sense of control, and it might lead, and a little bit of limited research, and we have found is that it actually does lead to more open discussion and less inhibition. And again, that can be for good and for bad, but we know the internet can do that. But when it is a benefit, it can also be a challenge, but it can be a benefit for somebody who cannot talk face-to-face, who's able to express that. And it can also provide some structure through some of that communication and have some sense of what the issues are going to be in the next session. And it can strengthen the therapeutic rapport. And then just generally for people in general, the web can provide a support system for them. So if somebody feels very isolated because of, for whatever reason, whether it's anxiety, a marginalized group that they're in, they might be able to access that, and that can make a difference for them. So studying the creep. So we first did this in 2009, where we interviewed practitioners and executive directors. And we just sort of left it open and interviewed practitioners, and then we presented it at a conference, and then a young member of the audience pointed out to us that just coincidentally, all our practitioners were in the older age range, like 35 and above. And so we thought, well, isn't that interesting? So we decided at that point that we would now try to interview younger generations, because we know the younger generation are digital natives and we're immigrants, so it's very different. So we interviewed them, and then, and Marion will give the results of that. And then what happened is we actually found some pretty significant differences, but by the time we interviewed them, during that 3-year period is when the handheld devices and the internet had totally invaded everybody. So we realized we have to go back to the older practitioners, because 3 years later, we don't know what they think. So we did go back to them. And so that's who we have. And then we did an analysis of the emerging themes. So what we're going to present is the original themes, and then the themes 3 years later of the original participants as well as the new practitioners, and then we'll talk about some conclusions and implications. And so the study is ongoing because it's all work in progress. So the major finding is that really 3 years ago we thought it was dramatically creeping in. That was my bias, that we would find that, but we actually found that it had totally impacted traditional practice. It totally had. And I'll review a little bit of how. And one quote said, it's just a given. Like, in this day and age, you can't not communicate. It just happens. So it had completely invaded. And the thing that was interesting is I think some people from our focus groups are here, and a couple of them said they came to the focus group because they thought it would be interesting and they didn't think they had anything to say, but during the talk, they realized it had crept into their own work. So it's one of those things that it happens so insidiously that you don't even notice it's happening until you stop and think about it. So the initial themes were client-driven practice, Pandora's box, ethical gray zone, and permeable boundaries. So the first one was that really the overwhelming finding at that point was that clients initiated the cyber communication much more often, much more purposely, and more persistently than the practitioners. And in many cases at that point, the practitioners were not really so happy about it. They really weren't. But they talked about why they had to respond. So it was things like the client age, and they recognized younger clients are much more likely, that's how they communicate. That's what they're wanting, so how can I not do that? And then client preference, one of the premises, one of our main mission or values in social practice is start with the client is. So if the client is there and you don't believe in it, we realize we need to go there. And then the advantages, realizing that it complements face-to-face sessions, especially for clients with difficulty. So a lot of people talked about how they'd have a session, client would have trouble talking, and then after they would send an email just sort of expanding on something. So it was really an additional benefit. And then of course they talked about the challenges. So the slippery slope is the big one. That it starts with an email like, can I change the appointment? It's administrative, no problem. And then next thing you know is an issue comes up, the next thing you know is you have a crisis and it's a Friday night and you've read that email. So that's the slippery slope. So that was the first thing. The second is Pandora's box. So once it begins, it's hard to undo. You've opened it up, it's like the genie's bottle. And they really expressed concerns about that. And there were unexpected consequences, both positive and problematic. So the positive is that all of a sudden there's access for clients that they didn't have before, such as mobility, hearing, and the negative issues were the concerns about privacy and confidentiality. And we'll get to that later too. And then also about clients misinterpreting because of the lack of visual and verbal cues, a concern that something can be misunderstood. And also the expectation that because of email, that if you send an email